Dr. Stephan Stevens is a Jungian orientated psychotherapist and a lecturer in counselling at the University of Canberra. She holds a PhD from the University of Kent in Jungian psychology. She is the author of C.G. Jung and the Dead Visions, Active Imagination and the Unconscious Terrain. Her research includes the unconscious transgenerational inheritance, cultural broaching, and the self in therapy. Wonderful to have you here tonight. You can see you draw a crowd. We love you. It's funny. Stephanie, can I give you just a film?
We're just going to get oriented here.
Set off just for a second.
Just get okay.
Okay.
Can we hear it? It doesn't sound on, does it? It does? Ah, there it is. Okay. Or maybe I should turn it a little. This way. How are we doing there? Hello, hello. Can we hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's go with that. And I'm wondering if the online people can hear. I'll let Robert take care. So thank you for the invitation, Jean. And it is so lovely to be here in Canberra with the Canberra crew. We're a very special Jungian community here because we're small, right? And it's so lovely to kind of be on home territory, home ground. So it's really lovely. So thank you for coming out on a Friday night. It's a hard time at the end of the working. So I really appreciate it. And I also am glad that Jean did acknowledgement of country. And of course, when we acknowledge working and living on Ngunnawal land, we're acknowledging an ancestral presence. And so I'm just wondering if we could start this evening by just kind of drawing close an ancestor that has passed for you. And if we can just draw them close, because this is kind of what we're talking about today. Okay? So let's just take a minute to just kind of gather in the room. You could close your eyes if you like, or keep them open. And just in a couple of breaths, just there's going to be someone who pops in your mind. And just allow that person to be present. Okay. We want to thank the ancestors for allowing us to come to gather. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes or we can refocus. I have to share that I did that exercise before I gave a paper in Cape Town a few years ago. On the topic of ancestors. And as soon as I started talking and ended that, the lights and the power went out everywhere. And so I just made mention that, in fact, you know, they are here and they are approving. Okay, so tonight's presentation is very different from what I usually do. Usually when I do these, I come with a PowerPoint, I come with references, it's very serious. We walk through the points, I build a case. Tonight's quite different, and it has to do with the nature of this published piece and the container in which it grew. So I want to tell you a story about how it came to be, and it kind of is in keeping with the content of the chapter that I'll share tonight. So I was on a family trip in South America. I was in Santiago, Chile, place I'd never been, with the family, and we were traveling, and I got a text and an email from Luis Maurice, who's an analyst in Zurich, and the text and the email said, I'm pulling together a collection under the title Confronting Death, and I'd really like for you to contribute. Now, I don't know Luis very well. I haven't really connected with him other than the fact that I know that our PhD topics ran parallel, where my PhD topic was Jung and the dead up to Jung's experiences until 1918. Luis did 1919 to 1965 in his PhD. I did know that about him. But what I didn't realize at the time, and I quickly texted back, was, Luis, aren't you Chilean? Weren't you born in Santiago? And he wrote back and said, yes, why? And I said, I'm standing in Santiago right now. I find this uncanny. Yes, of course, I would love to contribute, because I know that kind of synchronicity means something to me. So that's why I agreed right away. So also concurrently, what happened, and I think it was after that trip, some friends and I, and one of them is here with me today, got together to see the Barbie movie. And I walked away from that. We had a wonderful time. Can I just have a show of hands how many have seen the Barbie film? Okay, lovely, wonderful, wonderful. So I walked away from the Barbie film incredibly lit up and thinking that there are things that I've wanted to say and themes that I had been wanting to explore for a very long time. And so when the invitation came from Luis, I thought, I'm going to just sit down and see if I can pull some of these things together that have been on my mind for a very long time to put them in form. Now, most of my publishing is in sync with my lecturing format by academic publishers. And this is a very, very different kind of piece. It's a personal piece, and it is by a different publisher that kind of has some open ideas. And that is why Luis chose this publisher. The other thing he wanted to explore in confronting death was there are many Jungians in our community who are coming into the fourth stage of their wisdom and their journey. And he wanted to really explore with them their thoughts, not only of how they were kind of coming to the end of their professional lives and maybe personal lives and maybe pulling back a bit, but he wanted to know about the work with clients, working with clients who had been exploring unconscious material right before their death. Was that something that had really influenced their work as analysts? And so this was part of the idea of exploring confronting death. Now, when he told me the title, I thought, aren't I a little young for that? I was like, are we aligned? And then he assured me, of course, we're exploring this, anything you want to do. And so I started with Barbie's question, right? So I'm going to read from the chapter, also a different format, and I'll stop and explain little things along the way. And then after I finish, I'd really like for us to kind of respond, even just some thoughts, some considerations. Then, as Jean said, we'll break for a snack, and then we'll open it up. I have some discussion questions that we could kind of chew on. Right? So here we go. Barbie's question. I'm just gonna check to see, keep track of the time so I don't talk until everyone's sleeping or asleep, right?
You'll got it.
I will indeed. Good. Okay. The opening scene of Greta Gerwig's film, Barbie, is almost 7 full minutes of sway and swing and joyousness as it effortlessly revels in the perfection confection that is Barbie land. The fun is high-pitched, veering between very fun to really, really very fun. There's a pace and pink and unwavering enthusiasm for living the Barbie way. And we all know that Barbie land has always been like this. In celebration of all that they are, Barbie captures the spirit of the place by proclaiming, this is the best day ever. And so is yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and so is every day from now until forever. So comes as a surprise with hands clapping and arms waving while line dancing with the Kens, that Barbie wonders the quiet part out loud. Do you guys ever think about dying? The question is such a shock and in such contrast to the prevailing mood that it is laughable. And in melodramatic fashion, Barbie land freezes. The dancing stops, the music stops, and the Barbies stand agape. They are not so shocked by the content of the question as they are by its occurrence, which has interrupted the unconscious they are all living and enjoying. This is only matched by Barbie's realization that her heels have fallen and now rest oddly yet solidly on the ground, signaling a condition that no one in Barbie land has ever quite considered. And as the film moves on to Weird Barbie, who has been played with hard, embodied hilariously by Kate McKinnon, Gerwig's real and former college roommate, we are left reflecting if all decisions in the Barbie universe come down to that choice, either those silk pink heart-buckled Manolo Blahniks versus those brown Birkenstocks. Question is Barbie. She asked it out loud, and now she is tasked with answering it because in Barbie land, isn't that quite right? There are odd happenings and tears in the perfection that are interrupting the bliss that is their unconscious dance. In fact, some of the Barbies aren't too bothered about the question and are more concerned why Barbie is so unlike her Barbie self. As she journeys to the real world, the other world, to be tossed about by all the duality has to offer, it is the question of mortality, if not the messy side of a striving conscious life, that gets Barbie's pink convertible rolling. It's the question that hangs around everything and what introduces an anxiety that is foreign to Barbie, whose literal name in Latin means foreign woman. We learn through Barbie's journey that the dark thoughts are attributed to a real woman in the real world, played by the impassioned America Ferrara. And it is her misgivings and deep loneliness about being a woman and a mother and an office worker that has propelled Barbie into this question. And the question itself is never really directly answered by Journey's End. Yet Barbie's anthem is to embrace her humanness. And this could only have been done with that seminal question. Barbie's travails also beg consideration. Can we really live either in Barbie land or in the real world, in either place, without grappling with that question? So I grew up during the 60s and 70s at the moment of cultural expansion, which stretched beyond the black and white television, beyond the nuclear family structure, beyond the A-line skirts, and during the rise of the political protest. In a one television household, I still had plenty of access to the TV shows that nurtured my childhood, dovetailing into unreal realms that furthered the scope of possibilities. On a diet of I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and The Flying Nun, here were women fancifully and magically playing with standard operating conditions while stretching and using the unseen to enhance their given lives. Fantastical, yes, but also posing a question: what would happen if you didn't accept those suburban nuclear family black and white narratives of Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Dick Van Dyke, and My Three Sons? Although My Three Sons shifted to color later on. Were these fantasy narratives the hint of not just liberation of women's lives? Certainly, but perhaps more so of women's psyches. Or were they saying, perhaps, just perhaps, there is something more going on? And just about the time Barbie came on the scene in 1959, there must have been DNA deep in the narrative that charted a course for girls and women, not just farther into the world, but farther into the dimensions of the psyche. I'm not saying that because Elizabeth Montgomery could twinkle her nose and produce effects that gave me permission to trust all of my non-ordinary experiences. But the whimsy of magical, if not flexible possibilities gave my psyche space and room to explore those what ifs. In a sense, Barbie's question might be the one to address the nature of living itself. So Avery Gordon shares with us, ghostly matters are part of social life. Haunting is a part of our social world, and understanding it is essential to grasping the nature of our society and for changing it. Jung was very open, if not transparent, about his uncanny experiences with ghosts, as was he reflective, and he was doubtful, and he was interrogating. Even over a century later, we are not really any clearer on what precisely these experiences say about the dead, about us, or about the moment that occurs. Jung too felt that it was far too simple to dismiss these encounters as projections. But of course, after that line was drawn in the sand, he struggled to bring form to the formless. This topic sits in the back row of his psychological ideas, never really emerging as a discernible entity or an elucidating concept. Adrian Harris, Spielrein scholar, suggests the idea with respect to Sabina Spielrein. And I think Sabina Spielrein was the young patient that Freud sent to Jung. And there's some good juicy gossip about if they had an affair, but there was definitely something going on. Jung became her analyst and would take her on rounds around the Bugolzi Hospital and ask her, also a resident of the psychiatric hospital, what she thought about other patients there. She was very bright, very curious, and the movie, The Most Dangerous Method, is based on her. So the Spielrein scholar, Adrian Harris, tells us the distinction between an amorphous ghost who sits in the back row and a definable ancestor is one that occupies a lineage on center stage. That is one who steps into a proper sense of place. The movement from ghost to ancestor is a compelling one because it grants agency. It grants a direction to follow from what has previously and traditionally sat as a confused to the sorting out of why this ghost, why now, why me, and so what? These questions are for consciousness' sake, a way of living with the unknowable. And yet we live with plenty of unknowables. The mystery of love, why we are here on earth, and could we be the only conscious beings in the universe? We live with these questions in the back row too, but these don't often unsettle us as does a presence in the kitchen at midnight. When I was living overseas and far away from the Texas city where my grandfather was aging and moving toward the end of his life, I became a meditator. Not a religiously oriented meditator, but a close your eyes, calm your mind, and create peace in your life meditator. I found that it was a perfect antidote to the busy life I was living and teaching in an inner city secondary school and enjoying the nightlife wherever I had the chance. When I was speaking to my grandfather on the phone, I could tell he was only half there, not deteriorating mentally, just his presence seemed not fully there. He would talk about his wife, who had died several years previously, yet never really said anything about the wife who was caring for him at that moment. But he remained sharp, knowing who I was whenever I called, remembering stories and laughing and poking fun. So feeling a sense of frustration that I wasn't there and feeling as if I could be doing more for him, I began a meditation practice that I read in Songyal Rinpoche's wildly popular book, Tibetan Book of the Living and Dying. And what it is the poem meditation. Maybe some of you know this. And the poem meditation is about envisaging the receiver of the blessing and envisaging a white light above their head and just envisaging that over and over, just the white light above your loved one's head. So the poem meditation or the transference of consciousness at the time of death seems so easy, and it gave me focus as I imagined moving light and energy into him. It was a type of prayer, but seemed a bit more dynamic, as at the end of each meditation, I felt I had sent him something of myself. And as I did, I became aware of how my own anxiety seemed to dissipate. I did this over a period of about 2 weeks. And as I was walking home one evening, I heard his voice pop into my head. I'm going now. It was clear yet a bit distracting as I was on a busy city street. But I responded by assuring him it was indeed time, that he should be ready and confident of his next step, and that he had all of our support. I continued to do POA as I walked, which was quite new for me, meditating on the fly, as it were. And so it was no surprise that when I arrived home to phone him, I learned that he had passed away earlier that evening. I was grateful that the meditation had worked for us both. Every once in a while, I will be somewhere and see a tall, gangly man with a wispy gray hair sticking out of a cowboy hat, and I think of him. In the early 90s, I was teaching in Southwest London at a private school. Recognizing the cost of living in this part of London, the school wisely had purchased several teachers' flats within walking distance to the school, and I lived in them my entire time there, appreciating both cost and convenience. One very close to the Richmond train station was a ground floor flat in a brutalist building, perfect for my single lifestyle as a teacher, but it was haunted. Maybe I should say, and it was haunted. At first, this was unsettling. You know, that odd sound, not noise exactly, but sound that you think you hear, but aren't quite sure. The hum of people speaking and realizing no one was in the breezeway. The running of water, only to realize the faucet was not on. Then the more menacing intrusions, waking up to the sound of silverware shaking in the drawer, only to walk into the kitchen to find the drawers open. And other times when clothes and books were scattered, when I had specifically placed them on shelves. One night about 3 a.m. on the bed where I was sleeping, I felt something. That sense you get when the bed leans into one side. I quickly opened my eyes to just make out an impression on the mattress next to me, as if someone was sitting there. And that was the last straw. I stood up in the middle of the room and yelled, "Enough, knock it off. Either pay rent or get out." At that moment, I saw the outline of an elderly man who had moved to the other side of the room. I just made out the smile on his face as he faded away. I never saw him again, and after that night, the whole flat exhaled into a rather everyday and ordinary place to live. What gave way to a peaceful home for Jung prompted him to produce 7 sermons. Places and people and history itself has loose ends flitting about. And if we are paying attention, or perhaps not paying attention, is when you can pick up these things. Maybe we are called into these spaces to seam together in some sensible way that which has been untended or ignored. Jung's significant point in the Nox Secundus commentary is that the work in these spaces on behalf of the dead is our work, necessary work. And to pretend the dead aren't there, someone misses the point. When I first discovered Jung, or as many say, when Jung found me, I consumed his perspectives on how he was living with his confrontation of the unconscious. And yet it was his growing into an understanding of his unconscious that seemed most remarkable to me. He held the experience, he held the doubt about it, and possible explanations of it, and gauging alongside the prevailing literature of the day in order to bring some sense to himself and the kind of person he was evolving into as a result. This is what I found so reassuring about his accounts of the dead. That is, what I found, his honest acknowledgement that he was transfixed by something while still being onto something, is what resonated with my own unfolding. I studied in St. Andrews, Scotland for 1 year, and it is the spookiest place I've ever lived. St. Andrews is a cathedral city, and the cathedral was built in 1100. The entire town sits dramatically windblown on the coast that abuts a lengthy white sandy beach. The cathedral ruins are perched above the North Sea, and the sea stretches in a mix of blue water and cold gray sky. I lived in a place called Dean's Court, thought to be the oldest building in the city and was the manse for the archdeacon of the cathedral. It sits directly across from the cathedral ruins, and from the living room, you could look right across the street through the ruins and into that stretch of sea. It was beautiful and cold and spooky, except for the few days in the month when the sun splintered through the cloud cover. My dorm building was added sometime in 1400 or later. You could be standing next to the window and not only see your breath, but your hair blow across your face. And from the draft that made its way inside, no matter how insulated the buildings were. I went to lunch at a friend's who lived in town, and she invited me to eat under a stack of blankets on her bed with a space heater going on high. And I couldn't help but think that this was the coldest moment, eating or otherwise, that I had ever experienced, while my nose was running and I became too distracted by the inside weather to even have a conversation. But the temperature is why most of the time we congregated in the living room of the main building, where it was convivial and warm and where you could always find someone to chat with, except very late at night, which for some reason, over my entire time at St. Andrews, I found to be the most conducive for studying, translating, and jogging. I managed to find those midnight hours to flow like other students' day hours, and this time proved most productive. I always seemed to want to take a lengthy run all over town during the night, down North Street, over to West Sands, alongside the golf course, and where you could just imagine the chariots of fire cast running and cursing the blistering winds as well. One night, I caught a second spurt of energy and increased my running pace. It must have been nearing 2 a.m. as I was coming along the curve of a sidewalk along the scores and just approaching the corner of the building when I felt this smack. It wasn't as if someone had hit me. It was as if someone had stood solidly in front of me and I ran into them. I bounced back, almost falling, and gasped in shock, looking around for some explanation, only to realize that had I continued on the path, I would have run right into a scaffolding steel pole positioned right level with my forehead. I was shaken, and yet so grateful for whatever stopped me, literally in my tracks, saving me from a potentially devastating injury. I've often remembered what that felt like, to be stopped with just air and space between me and that scaffolding. I had a graduate study office in a building right on the sea, aptly named Castlecliff. Graduate students had offices all over campus, and some of them, as I settled in to my space, shuddered and said, "It's kind of spooky over there." I didn't think much of it at the time, other than compared to the rest of this place. So, of course, I found myself walking to Castlecliff late at night, arriving after 10 and often studying till 2, 3, or 4 in the morning. The window, of course, looked out over the sea, and the wind blew constantly with a steady stream of sea spray. And often the wind would whistle the way wind does, making its way around and through cracks of a building. One evening, as I settled into work, I heard clearly, as if it was just underneath the window, the music of bagpipes. Not the sound of bagpipes, but music playing. It lasted for about 5 minutes and happened several different times. I raised it with some friends who said, "Oh, yes, it's haunted over there. Have you heard of that story about the bagpiper who went down to play music near the cave on West Sands and never came back? Now you can still hear him playing. They call him Jock the Piper." Another night, as I wandered for a study break, hoping to catch someone in the living room and found no one, I turned the lights on and walked over to the window, and out near the entrance of the cathedral were two figures walking. Well, floating, side by side and entering the cathedral grounds. I rubbed my eyes and blinked to find they were still making their way across the ruins. After that night, I grew a real respect for the spirit of place and how history lives far apart from our trespasses and our busy lives among it. My family has had a run of good luck when it comes to family dogs. And it is my sister who seemed to fall in love with a canine, to nourish it and nurture it, and then suddenly be called to work in assignments involving travel and dropping these dogs off with my parents. Emma, one of these dogs, was a small, short, brown-haired Swedish terrier, not so much a Swedish breed, but that she was adopted in Sweden. Emma spent her elder years with my parents in the US, and as it is often the case with our beloved furry family, she soon lost her vision and became diabetic. Her days were numbered, and my parents each were inconsolable that she was coming to the end of her life. At the time, during their sharing of sadness, I do not remember thinking this, but in the middle of their account of her illness, I said, "You will know when she's passed over completely because you will hear bells." As soon as I said it, I thought, now, why would I say such a thing that I could not possibly guarantee or know the outcome or prove? And I didn't think much more of it. And I tried to console them for the next few weeks. And soon it happened, and Emma passed peacefully. And the next day, my father called and he said, "This is so weird. In the middle of the day, I heard these loud bells, like church bells, clanging in the kitchen. The TV wasn't on and the phone hadn't rung. It was just bells chiming." It was then he remembered what I had said a few weeks prior, and realized its significance. And he asked, "How did you know that that was going to happen?" And of course, I didn't. But it did give me pause. Did I plant the idea in his head that he would hear the bells? I think that's giving me way too much credit. Did he remember in his grief and produce the sound himself? Perhaps. Yet the way he reported hearing it seemed too explicit to be conjured. But truly, the point, does it matter? Did it matter that we could not explain how he came to hear the bells, given the deeply peaceful understanding that the sound gave him in relation to his beloved dog? Many years ago, I was watching my 2-year-old nephew, who was cranky and feverish and not interested in sleep. With fitful activity and occasional moments, he lay his head down on the bed with his eyes wide open. I remember the bedroom had a large window that was covered to keep the light out in hopes he would sleep more easily. But he thought it much more fun to pull at it until shards of light lit the wall and floor and made visible dust balls floating in the air. His fever seemed to be getting worse, as did his reddening cheeks. I was worried and became very quiet in the hope of listening to how his body and temperature might reveal either a serious sickness or something he might shake. And as I stilled, the atmosphere in the room changed. And as soon as I wondered, what's going on here? What's happening? The room fell full of sunlight and the air thickened and a group of people appeared. It was a strange gathering, as it seemed, to be made up of members of my family, but in different generations. So my father was standing there to my left, yet as far as I knew, he was thousands of miles away and quite alive. His mother, my grandmother, who was deceased, was also standing there on the other side of my nephew. And next to her was my grandfather, the one who passed in London, who had been deceased for many years by that time. In the center was my nephew, hair matted to his sweaty forehead, a bewildered look, as if he too could tell the air hung with presence. And there was movement, like a constellation in space, a movement of patterns throughout the room with stillness and motion, if that's even possible. Again, I wondered what was happening with 4 generations assembled in this dappled room surrounding a sick little boy. Then it came in a flash of recognition. My father had lost a brother, my grandparents a son, almost 62 years before, from scarlet fever. And I felt a rush of fear that this is what my nephew was suffering. And did this mean the same for him? Or was there something more complex at work here? Was my nephew, in fact, my father's younger brother, who had died as a child and now was a child again? My thoughts were jumbled and sense making wasn't revealing a clear solution. Yet I knew I needed to assimilate something given the data in front of me. The group went still, and the constellation continued to move slowly as my nephew paused, looked up, and smiled. I looked at all three of them who were gazing down at my nephew, just watching with no expression to indicate an outcome. I had the thought again, could my nephew actually be this deceased child? And could he once again be taking a place in the family lineage? Or was there a need to call into memory the uncle I would never meet, who had died so many years ago? Or was the extended family asking for his memory to be honored, for his place to be honored? As I paused and looked to ask each of my relatives, they faded away. The constellation stopped, the thickness in the air lightened, and my nephew looked at me, still smiling, and stretched his hand out into the air. I too felt relieved. I don't know why, and yet less than an hour later, my nephew's fever disappeared, and he settled and finally fell asleep. Some 10 years later, when I eventually read Jung's Garden Party Dream and Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I felt I understood how he experienced multiple awarenesses simultaneously, or rather, one awareness giving way to multiple perceptions. As you can see, even the language here obfuscates the experience. And of course, the important question, why would I be able to see this? And so what? What did it all mean? Simply a sneak peek behind the veil? Was I meant to do something about this, or had I already? Had I looked into an intersectional space that held the possibilities of each person so as to calibrate an existing imbalance? And as such, everyone had deeply seen what I had. When we consider the work of the dead, perhaps this means we tend to what is in front of us, even if we don't understand it. And maybe because I witnessed this, a healing of sorts initiated in me that rippled in 3 different dimensions. And perhaps the questions around this encounter are more important than discernible answers. By holding the question of my nephew's origin and illness, is that more importantly placed than the answer that he could have been my father's brother? Or was the point that we all happen to share the same DNA and there was a pattern about to emerge? Had we not borne witness to the grief and damage that a little boy's death in the 1940s had on 4 generations? The next story I've shared with the Jungian community before, but it deserves a place here, as I couldn't really grasp or explain it at the time. Almost 25 years ago, again in London, it's a hot place for me. I remember the day clearly as I was on my way to pick up a part for my computer. And later I remember thinking, how funny, how ironic that this technological need was what steered me across this space in Southwest London. I'd gotten off the bus and was walking across the square when suddenly, as I was walking, I emerged into a different setting. The square was decidedly there, but the people were different, dressed in bright colors, almost in costumes, with hats and blousy trousers and leather shoes. There was a huge party with dancing and song and instrumental music and merriment. It took about 20 paces for me to walk through the celebration and out of it, at which time I found I had crossed the square to the other side and was about to enter the computer shop. A bit dazed, I asked the shop attendant if he knew anything about the square, and he said, pointing back to where I had just walked, that stone sitting in the center was where all the ancient kings of Britain were crowned. That is the area of London called Kingston. That is the King's Stone. I was stunned, wondering, had I walked into something? Had I walked through it? Had I shifted awareness? Or what exactly happened? What I did understand from that day, again, is places have their own presence and present. And London from that time became a very different city for me. Again, perhaps history isn't really a past idea, but rather a tab appearing on our laptop screens. It's there, but not open. I had a client once many years ago who was grieving. His story was confronting, and to this day, the most violent story from a client I've worked with. His female friend had been murdered not long ago, and the loss was still fresh, as was his anger, his bitterness, and need for revenge. In fact, he was certain he knew who had murdered his friend, and the focus of our sessions was on managing these feelings of vengeance. As his thoughts began to mull over the possibilities, I had the strangest and most distracting experience, an overpowering aroma of strong Black coffee. I dismissed it as I was tracking my client's emotional space and exploring with him how he would feel after reconciling his loss with violence. Again, the Black coffee aroma was strong. I looked around to see if perhaps I had left an open container. Did I bring coffee into the room? And that I was picking it up. But no, there was no coffee in the room. And after a few minutes, for the third time, the aroma rose. And this time it appeared with a flash, an image of a cup of coffee in a fast food paper cup, very specific. I focused back on the client and how he was expressing his plan, but the aroma was so distracting, I simply couldn't ignore it. I thought, should I mention this to him? If it doesn't mean anything, then I've interrupted an important piece of therapeutic work, his clarity on revenge. But if I do share it and it is meaningful, I'm not sure where this will all go. So I took a leap and said, as you are talking, I have this impression of strong, dark coffee in a paper cup. And he looked shocked and paused. And then he began to weep. And through his tears, he explained that the two of them often met to have coffee. She liked it strong and Black with no sugar, and they always met at a local fast food spot. So who knows where the coffee scent came from? His psyche, his memory, which was strong in grief? Or did it come from her to him and I intercepted it? Or from her to me? And yet, how could it have just been me? So over the years, I've landed on the fact that the resolution of these questions doesn't really matter and really isn't the point. For this man, his focus shifted immediately as he considered that a gesture of vengeance and violence had no part in his loving memory of her. And had he decided on that direction, it would have dishonored the bond that they shared. As a Latin teacher, I spent several summers in Rome studying and wandering around the ruins with other graduate students and priests and nuns and scholars who needed a functional level of Latin to research at the Vatican Library. We were an odd crew of all ages and all with the bent of enjoying this ancient language in a place that had been its home. One year, I managed to secure a summer job with a prominent American architectural scholar who was hosting a seminar for architects to study ancient buildings. He needed an assistant, and I had just enough Italian to support him and his efforts with the seminar, as well as to assist the participants settling into the city with their various needs. He was a wonderful academic to work for and included me at seminar meals and at his family gatherings. And when I think about my time during that particular summer, it was convivial gatherings at the American Academy, as well as the on-site visits around the city that remain memorable. 4 years after that summer, I returned to Rome, unplanned, last minute, with a friend who had never been. I was excited to show her the many places I found, amazing for such a city that seems to live in contemporary and ancient ways simultaneously. We hopped on the number 70 bus near Trastevere, and she asked me when I was in Rome last, and I began sharing stories about the memorable summer with the architect, how lovely he and his family were, and how intriguing the seminar topic turned out to be, how he secured special entrance access to Nero's palace, which was just then beginning substantial excavation. There was a lot to tell as the bus weaved its way across the Tiber and into Largo, Argentina, where we were deciding to hop off. As I finished reminiscing, enjoying how strong story and memory can be, I looked up to see the architect and his family climb onto the front of the bus. He glanced at me and smiled. He greeted me and we chatted briefly. My friend and I got off the bus there and she asked, "Who is that?" And she couldn't believe this was the same architect we had been chatting about for the previous 15 minutes. The one I had not seen the last time I was in Rome 4 years previously. I have friends who say that this is the universe's way of fact checking. I've grown to understand this is really about living close, if not alongside the unconscious. So Jung stepped into the lineage of psychology with a whole slew of experiences. His fascination with human behavior, his understanding of his cousin Helly and her bent, his doctoral work, his own experiences with the uncanny, his number 1 and number 2 personalities, his own ghost sightings, his obsession with the Nikia, which is the descent into the underworld. These are so much a part of Jung's psychological model that to try and conceptualize his theories without being conscious to this is like only working with half of the unconscious. And as he emerged out of those early years of his confrontation, he knew undoubtedly that he was becoming more himself and embracing a sort of psychological interoception that would serve him well while being of service to others. So when considering these challenges that life offers, the struggles and the disappointments and the humiliations and the frustrations and the agonies, to think death could be any harder than living and all of this, I don't think is possible. Death could not be any sadder than the feeling of heartbreak and the stubborn stain that it leaves, which makes it harder to love. Or the cold knowing of a missed opportunity, or the surprising emptiness that moves in when your children or grandchildren leave home. Would we choose to grow old in the way that it comes? Probably not. That Achilles had the choice is more than any of us get. Live a long life, but unknown, or die young and in glory, but never knowing it as such. The cruelty is not in death, but rather in the daily and often minor battles that we all wage over a lifetime. The prima materia, as Jung loved to say, the prima materia that we struggle to cast into a life that we can live and do so in peace with ourselves. So if I had to imagine an afterlife, which is what Louise asked me to talk about, if I had to imagine death and an afterlife, it would be something like the Burning Man festival with air conditioning and less sand, or perhaps a full moon rave in Goa with easy access to a comfy hotel. In any case, I suspect the afterlife isn't so much a break or a vacation as it is a different type of work. We get down to business, observational business, just skewed toward the unconscious with an optional upgrade to consciousness. So we can't unhear Barbie's question. It was already sitting just underneath all that pink paint, all that planned choreography and bespoke song. I could no less ignore these episodes in my life than Barbie could ignore her flat feet and angst-inducing journey into consciousness. Death is everywhere. It has already arrived, and it sits in the seams that make life living possible. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So that was the assignment in order to be included in the collection. And Luis, after he read it, said, well, could you tuck it here and tuck it there? And I said, yes, of course I will. And I know there are other writers in this collection that are doing some heavy lifting on grief and passing and death. Barbie deserves a place in here. So,
Thank you very much.
so we can.
I know, I don't know. Yeah, we'll have a break now. We have a special.
Stephani would open up for everyone to consider. Or if you wanted to ask questions, we could do Q&A for a bit. If anyone had any questions, or if you want to share anything, what would you like to do? Maybe that would work for everybody. Make it organic. Okay, excellent. So, does anyone have anything, any comments to make it organic? Start it. So, let me just frame this. That one of the prompts that Louise really wanted to include in this collection is how Jungian therapists and analysts come to the question around death, dying, and the work that they do with their clients. And so my response was really also about, I can't separate my opinions of death apart from my experiences of the unconscious. They're the same to me, if that makes sense. And then my understanding of my own unconscious came from these experiences that I've had with death and this expanding awareness of the unconscious. So perhaps some of you have had experiences or make comments.
I just think and begin that back making
Sure.
something quite extraordinary.
Sure. Just like the last paragraph. Yeah. Sure, I can do that. That's a very nice request, actually. Yeah, confronting death. And the consulting editor was Murray Stein. Is Murray Stein, if anyone knows his work, he's quite a well-known, he used to be a pastor, reverend, and then he did his analytic training. And now he runs an institute, a training institute in Zurich called ISAP Zurich. And it's kind of this renegade group that broke off of Jung's original Zurich group. Can everyone hear? Yeah. And you can see. Okay. Thank you for keeping track. We want the people online to feel included. Yeah. Okay, so the last bit. We can't unhear Barbie's question. And Barbie's question was, actually someone asked this. Barbie's question was, do you guys ever think about dying? We can't unhear Barbie's question. It was already sitting just underneath all that pink paint and choreography and bespoke song. I could no less ignore it. And Barbie could ignore her flat feet and angst-inducing journey into consciousness. Death is everywhere. It has already arrived, and it sits in the seams that make living possible.
I'm used to what that word was, see.
Seam, you know, like sewing.
Oh, I can see.
Yeah, It's the presence of death in our living that makes living so sweet. And that's what Barbie discovers. In her, she's in this unconscious land where everything's the same and everything's just wonderful and everything's perfect until it isn't. And so that's what prompts her to ask this question. And as soon as she asks the question, it's an individuating question. She becomes conscious, right? And that question stands in challenge and to her. And then she must go on a journey, right? It's like a hero's journey. Barbie and Harry Potter, same kind of thing, right? So she goes on this journey to the other world, which is our world. And then that's the Barbie movie is
In our world,
that many live unconsciously. Absolutely. Yes.
And I think that we are very big, up.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That we've had kind of this a cushy reality. So shocking things that are happening is that we can't believe what we're saying, right? And it's calling us to question, what is this about? What is my moral position? How can I live consciously and with my unconscious in such a space? But I probably agree. And yes, a lot of people do live unconsciously. They don't ask the questions, right? We have therapists because we have people who are asking the questions and don't know where to go to answer them or explore them, right? That's why we're busy. You mean
they're not ready to obey them. And that maybe that that working in a process would be quite challenging.
Well, everyone's doing their living. They're living with their own lives and their own. Yeah. Everyone.
It's funny, I was thinking the other day about my first real life speaking, and I was probably
Uh-huh.
And that means that I'm going to look my parents.
Mm.
And I was just wondering about these all.
Okay.
And that experience and what that was like for them, because I completely remember it being a shocking experience.
Yeah.
Like I almost remember where I would stand.
That kind of reality
That kind of reality
that hits.
I'm thinking about because she's brought me yeah, so I was just wondering what that maybe.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful prompt because I think in the West anyway, we live this kind of very clinical way where death is kind of over there, unless it's suddenly we're being called to go to a funeral to honor someone who's passed. It seems like an intrusion almost. Wait a second, I'm happy over here just doing my thing. And death often doesn't, knock on the door on a regular basis for us. And wars and the struggles of wars have happened over there, and we haven't had this at our doorstep. So yes, I think we've kind of been, I don't know, numb, privileged, blind, enjoying our, life until it intrudes. And it's going to, we're all heading, this highway only goes one direction. I mean, maybe you can get off on a little ramp off the side of the road, but you're getting back on the same road. Right? So,
was run over.
Mm.
And I just remember the collective grief. And so that was my first experience of death. And that sense of a grief to be traumatic.
And Jung's first memory, maybe remember in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, is, his father was a pastor. And his first memory is of a body being pulled from the water, and it was a little boy's body. And he kind of kept this memory, the shock. Paula, you're talking about that. Like, I remember where I was. Jung remembered that vision, and it kind of stuck and really sat there until he was able to kind of look at that.
Well, it's also an emotional memory.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, our Aboriginal, I don't want to speak for the Aboriginal community. Is there anyone here from Ngunnawal country or from other countries? No. But our Aboriginal communities have this very specific sari business. It's sanctioned, it's a process, it's connected to kinship, and it's a ritualized acknowledgement of community. And it is the opposite of what we have, unless you happen to live in a close community with others that acknowledge a ritual for yourselves. But would you like to talk a little bit about your experience today? Because you were sharing. Sorry, what's your name? Pam. Pam had shared a little something. I was wondering if she'd share.
It was a very different experience saying that in spending the afternoon in the family. So much you can do. You have a tree. What should people do? No one else that. And no one had spillage. Like that. So it was more like, it sounded strange, but it was more like going to maybe a beautiful day. So it was not, we were there all day. Yes, in one corner. The quiet, the whole afternoon. But it was just fascinating seeing into this spot. I should die at 103.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's more of a celebration of life. I mean, that concept of celebration of life has been a real difficult stretch for the West to get to. This.
Can I would say something interesting? I'm involved in a woman to bed, and the system up there is that when, doesn't matter how old you are, when someone dies there, you have 49 days process. So it's unheard of to all the information the next week. And they follow that 49-day process, and you have images and ceremonies of days. And
They consider that the soul takes 49 days to pass through the levels of the bardos in order to reach a place to consider reincarnation. It's a really beautiful.
they ceremonies up there last year. I think it's fascinating how people react to that situation.
And of course, here we have two stories of 103 and a 3-year-old. These are very different experiences, right? So I think the community would respond very differently as they have. Ritual.
Yeah, but do you think, or have you actually found any commonalities on how cultures and societies deal with them in terms of their ritual and tradition?
The Tibetans and Aboriginal peoples, people who live closer to the land, right? Not farmers, although they're farming community have their own acknowledgement of seasons. But I've noticed that people who live closer to the land tend to have more solid rituals. There's also a discussion in thanatology circles that those, yeah, the study of death, yeah, the study. So in those circles, they've done research. Okay, so basically, those communities and families that have ritualized grieving, a ritualized grieving process, if they stick with it for 7 to 10 days, that this emergence back into community is a bit easier. Those communities that don't ritualize or sanction that grieving period often harbor complex grief. Okay, psychologists call complex grief and grief that is not, hasn't landed in a sense of meaning, right?
So you're right to say societies those psychology
For children who are grieving?
for children, for adults. I mean, I'm guessing. I don't know, no idea, but it would depend on your life stage and where you are in the process. But
how prepared?
But I look around the world and everything. Every society and culture has a way of ritualizing the death event, what it means to those left behind. So it must be something there. And I'd be interested in learn it opinion really on what we should be doing. Doing in the West, you've got people in hospitals and it's all very plentiful.
And it's more complex now that formalized religion has plummeted.
Yes.
People have run away from formalized. I say run away, they've just turned their backs.
Yeah.
It's not serving. I don't want these blanket statements because there could be people sitting here who, that have very, but there are declining memberships in the world religions, right? And I think spirituality and things like Jungian psychology and psychology in general, there is more psychologists worldwide. In South America, people are studying psychology. Here, one of the most popular topics is psychology. And so I think people's attempt to grapple with moral and deeply emotional struggles that used to be housed in formal religions. So I think in terms of what we should be doing, I think we should be paying attention to our unconscious at the very beginning with young children and honoring their space. I mean, I feel a little like I'm trespassing here because Paula is a child psychologist. And so I don't want to trespass on that. But I think the more we pay attention to our individuation and our journey and give voice to the journey, like Barbie's journey, the more we give voice to that and acknowledge rites of passage and stop for a minute. And sometimes we're just so in a hurry to go to the next thing, but to stop and say, wow, we did this. Wow, we've raised our kids and they've left home. Wow, they've finished studying. Wow, they're getting married. Wow, and to acknowledge the individuating soul that's participated.
It's natural and normal.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that example, in the West in particular, I just West people are almost scared of that. You don't talk about it,
Yep.
and you don't see it. You don't see open coffin funerals or anything. When I was young, you did it. Every time you went to a funeral, you would do the body, you go and sort of kind of get closure, I guess, a psychobabble. But if you go to somewhere like Mexico, I mean, that's everywhere. It's just unbelievably.
And they have a celebration, the Day of the Dead, and it's a big celebration of it. I think you hinted at it because you said, is it those peoples that live close to nature. You know, the West has been living further and further away from nature. And we have lost the impulses of being connected to land. And so that comes with its own, you know, wound of severing, you know. Yeah.
We are kind of artificially
Mm.
in front of the reality. I mean, you actually pick up and you have things.
Mm.
You can never see it.
Mhm.
Never experience.
Yeah. It is art.
And that was like, I think it was in what we've done. Yes. I think it's really in an action. They go on. Yeah, thanks. Yes. Yeah, and that's what's so precious about being the kids.
Yes.
Because that experience the loss and the cycle of life.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that day. And like I have to say, I did get on and yeah, we were coming in panic.
Yes.
And when I had family, you know, how many kids, yeah, were very,
Yes.
and you know, that was the same as well, yeah.
Indeed. Right.
They knew that's where their kids were. Yeah, right.
And that acknowledged every day. That sad.
And on their way to school. And that's where whoever
Rover
one who was the latest and God. Yeah, it's so precious. And it's gonna happen. And there's always that new, it always got that when you. Let's see what goes down. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would like to actually share some of my personal experience. About 3 years, more than 3 years ago, I collapsed. I ended up going into coma for 2 weeks. I came out of it as not being, not medium. And so I had a very slow journey back. So one of the things in my look is the fear of death. It actually was I actually felt okay. So there was something there. I couldn't speak, I couldn't even do anything, and I was feeling ill. And that is actually a very beautiful experience. It's not at all fearful. Maybe for some people it's desperate fearful. I did not experience that yet. It was very much more. So, and it would have been all right if I didn't come back. Right. So you just did not feel like, felt more like a finish, not like something out wrong.
Right. So it reminds me of treating it as perfect. And he talked about, I think it's a pleasure of the wonderful feeling of being dead. And he was really like bent out of shape and being brought back. He's like, I think I'm good. So I can stay here. But it was very clear. So it sounds like you hit that same, maybe unconsciously.
It was same space. They didn't expect me to come back. They actually told my family that I was going. So there was no expectation for me to live at all.
Okay.
But here you are. Yeah. And it was, but it was not, that's not frightening for me.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say. It's so you're going somewhere.
You're going somewhere. And I think that was the point of the collection. To show that, you know, working with the human psyche, and Marie Louise Fontanes has said, you know, that the psyche doesn't seem to experience unending and dreams that people will, you know, a week before they pass. Like this is analysts have followed clients who, and you know, and already that the psyche does not experience an ending, and that it experiences an ongoing relocation of students. Yeah. And so that's why Louise was quite interested in getting some reflections on people who were, you know, self-analysts who were coming to the fourth part of their adulthood and to share their perceptions and their thoughts around that next journey and what they've learned from their clients. Yeah. So it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm sorry it was such an adult, but he's retired with this really peaceful.
And it's, I can go to much, much deeper places, because I don't have the fear. And that really does help.
And it's really shifts the room with the client, doesn't it? When you're sitting there, this sense of eldership and wisdom. It's really lovely. Thank you. That's a lot of fun. I'm creepy about staring at me. Hey. Well, go. You know, so I could shut the meeting. Yes, and imagine that person is now in spirit and on to their next, yes, so the child. That was round. I know. Expected being through a process, a judicial or a process. Not a grieving process, it's not be part of it. Well, they might not be through that, thinking that, but rather than kind of a ritual of respect. And I would be able to engage in that. And I'm thinking, well, why can I do that? Because she's in spirit. And I don't seriously listen to her.
I'm not just, I know where you're from. It is, that's it, it makes it very open. The start why it's such a complicated. And probably someone who are gone. You're just looking at the us.
The Barbie, yeah, can we just pause for and push it's
Coming back to Barbie.
Yeah, back to Barbie. The fact that Barbie, you were telling a story of how the movie opens with this fantasy world, and then Barbie sort of filmed the fantasy by introducing that in the story, and it really made me think of Carl Jung's discussion of the Catholic dogma of the assumption of the Virgin Mary, because there's a sense that the religion similarly creates a fantasy world of eternal life, and so the fact that Mary went straight up to heaven, and that became such an important dogma for the Catholic Church. It says something about the psychology of that fantasy of the ability to reject death and say, well, you know, Mary lived forever, Barbie's immortal, so Barbie's got sort of a structure.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I would not frame it as a religious, but as you were asking or framing the question, I was being reminded of Jung's father. I mean, this tug, right? This struggle of opposites. The father who was a pastor and a mother who was a little, psychic. I mean, she was a medium, right? And so Sunday morning they go to church, and Sunday night she was around the table talking to her dead deceased grandfather. So this tension were they really doing the same thing, tending to an unspoken narrative that was looking to be voiced? Maybe. Now, if that's religious, I don't know if it's a religious thing. What do you think?
Well, I suppose it's about spirituality, and so this sense that people get in mass culture, sort of sense of meaning in toys and movies, and like Barbie is one of the most popular, popular images And there's something about popularity that taps into archetypes of the collective unconscious.
Yes.
And so that raises the question of how does Barbie tap into those archetypes? And like partly they're consumers,
Okay.
but also just the image of eternal youth and just not having death or anything unhappy ever intruding.
That's interesting. Yeah, that'd be interesting. The other flip side of that is Barbie's the only doll that arrived as an adult. And so you have this kind of interesting interaction with children that are interacting with a doll that's mature, right? And then, of course, some feminist narratives go up on the projection of the body. Now, that's a whole really valid place, right? And yet, Barbie became a doctor and an astronaut before the first woman became an astronaut. So what comes first, the collective conscious or the egg? So which comes first? So I think, the Barbie narrative, you could really have, and people could write dissertations in half about the role of Barbie in children's play and growth and how adolescent girls, from the Barbie film, do you remember the adolescent girls sitting around the table and they are moaning and groaning and really giving Barbie a hard time about what she represents? And then the one girl said, I like Barbie. That was cool. I enjoyed playing with Barbie. And what was so beautiful was the whole gamut of opinions of how Barbie landed and what and the challenges to the archetype that Barbie prompted. Right? So I think there's a lot there. What you brought up with the religious function and what does spirituality what is Barbie trying to say? And I think there's a whole book about what Barbie's trying to say, the movie and the doll, right? Mattel's in there in the film too. The men decided what Barbie should be. They decided what Barbie should be.
Well, perception of the ideal.
Barbie's the mother. Yeah, and Barbie. They just came out with a LGBTQ Barbie like a few weeks ago, and oh, really? Hey, Down syndrome Barbie. It's good. It's good. So, lots to say. I think my point when I saw the film, it allowed me a way of conceptualizing, not necessarily spirituality and religion, but the psyche, the unconscious. Barbie is not conscious until she asks that question. And then she individuates because now she's curious. Something's happening to her life. Before she was unconscious. Now, she's starting to reflect. And that reflection brings her on this journey. And it's a really typical heroine's journey in a way. But it's that question that prompts her journey.
There must be a lot of young girls who were shocked by that somehow the movie was subverting the whole mythology of art.
Oh, interesting. I think
Right over their heads.
Yeah, I think the question is, oh, that's funny, because it landed with humor. The question landed, everyone's like, oh, crazy asking that question, because it's the opposite of what's going on with their dancing and their unconsciousness, and it's really death, the thought of dying or death, that wakes us up and has us reflecting. Am I doing what I want to do with my life? Am I, this is a finite thing we've got going. Am I really honoring what I'm here to be doing? So I think it does subvert, it challenges. That's how I do it. But it's an easy offer that extraterrestrial thing.
Sorry, Barbie goes Penny's world in the
Well, it's not Ken's.
So it made the real one.
The real.
That's just like that.
The
It's
real-
just sent into the underworld, isn't it?
It has-
Really, it's him.
Yes, it's the real world, but it's the Nikia.
right? It is the descent, because suddenly it's the opposite of the unconscious volition.
Yeah, talking about Barbie, it's really, I mean, it is really interesting. Also, for men, like it's sort of like secret women's business. You know, it's like I don't know anything about Barbie, and it's very gendered, if you know.
That means you're culturally deprived, like a.
Oh, I know. I'm deprived on every other.
But if you haven't seen the film, I think just grab your friends and put it on a Sunday afternoon and try to watch it.
I might give it a go. I really struggle getting through. Oh, God, this is so American, frankly. But you know, like it's full of consumerism and buy this product, and you know, like that's how I projected onto it, if you like.
You're supposed to. You're supposed
Yeah,
to.
yeah, I'm listening. And I think actually that your point was very good. That it is like it is like a modern myth. You know, like mythos. You've got descent into the underworld. You've got ideals and journeys and heroines and heroes, and it's really got all of the old stuff.
Check it out, the audience, Toys R Us, Apple.
Like toys, yeah, I could, you know, pop out and buy one or whatever. But I thought I did. I think it was very interesting because
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting history. Now there are anthropologists who've written on it, on Barbie and evolution. There are psychologists who've written on it. It's a cultural icon. You know, like I mentioned, it arrived in 1959, and that was a really big social movement that time. You know, not only this women's birth control, the feminist movement, you know, space travel. There's so much that happened during that time. You know, the heat of the 60s, political upheaval, you know, all of that agitated the unconscious. You know, that kind of mythical land everyone was living in from post World War II until the Kennedy assassination. That kind of, you know, isn't this great? It seems wonderful. You know, economic expansion, economic comfort, it's right until, you know, the first woman decides that, you know, is this all I'm doing? Is baking and picking my kids up and sewing? And then that question agitated everyone enough, the women, enough to start first wave feminism for that. Second wave, second wave. Yeah, second wave. But that of course, and I would never mean that or any. I'm just saying historically, this is what happened, and I'm very interested in how social behavior is a reflection of the unconscious. I'm always watching television and themes and music and themes. What's happening as this expression of the unconscious? It really is insightful.
what do you sound like?
I don't think I have the corner of the answer. No, that's a buy-in. And
What's your opinion of?
well, I think that there's competition
Yeah, yeah,
to confront whatever we're confronting, and that can be our personal relationships, for jobs, power. There's a lot of themes about power and what being empowered means and what kind of power is playing on the planet. Just me. What is our political? What does politics mean? Is politics voice or is politics power? And I think it has been for a long time, and it's a big thoughts and opinions. Now we might have to like
no.
step into action, whatever action means to each person. Their individuating self.
I think that's right. Let's have a sort of if I'm feeling insensitive to radio. you just kind of know that something important stuff.
Instincts, awareness, what it means to me in my life and my individual self, and how is it the health of my psyche, my mental health, you know, are we taking care of all those levels?
And the final question I'll ask is, did you Barbie when you were
Oh, of course.
Did you?
I
Oh,
do.
and how did you use that Barbie? Was she like your friend, your secret?
I was not the camp that abused my purpose. I loved my.
Is there a camp that abuses her?
Yes, it's also
Why not?
to study and survey teenage girls on how they play with Barbie.
Yeah.
Some of the stories were brutal, putting a microwave, and watching her, you know, throwing her off of buildings, competition, like serious, like, you know, aggression around the Barbie. And I think that, yes, yes,
And that's
weird Barbie. Kate McKinnon plays Pierce Barbie, and she can't stand up straight. Again, she's always splayed. Okay, I'm probably coming to the end of our evening because it's 10 o'clock and you guys have done incredibly well. So I think thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's really amazing to have you here today. And we have some items to send you on your way.
Thank you. Oh, that's lovely.
You have to put them on plastic.
Okay. You sound nice. You're so lovely.
That's very rare.
That's very sweet.
Okay, so yeah. It'll sit in the
Oh,
$100
so sweet. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephanie,
It's my
for sharing your experiences and insights in this rather surprising journey. So it's been really fabulous. And actually interesting about Barbies. My daughter was given a whole lot of Barbies from one of her friends that didn't want them anymore. So she had quite a big collection of Barbies. So it filled up quite a lot of it spare time when we lived out in the country. So it's pretty amazing. So on Sunday, we have Dorothy here. She is conducting a back to her dream group, which she used to do. So it was really amazing to have her come back and do that now. So she's going from time is from 2 to 4:30 p.m. on Sunday afternoons, starting this week at Wesley Uniting Church. That's where Robert and I go. There are more details on our website, so please check with Dorothy if you're interested.
Can I just make an announcement from the other side? On that very day, we sad to see that our friend
Caroline, yes.
on the aeroplane to
Yeah.
go to Canberra for a year.
Yes.
So when we arrived on Carolyn's flute music and her smiling face,
Going to miss you.
tones,
You're not allowed to go.
away in Canberra.
Well, work here and stuff, there at the back, really struggling for in the local.
So when you come back, you'll have to do a presentation for us. Next year. You're on. Okay, so what we have for next on Friday, the 6th of March, we have an annual general meeting at 6:30 for 7 p.m. Reports for the year election of our committee and office bearers. Please consider nominating for a role to help keep the society running. You need to be a financial member to be elected. Of course, it's a time to join as a member or to renew your membership for $75 for the year, March to February, or $60 for seniors or concession. That gives you free entry to the Friday meetings and other benefits such as being able to borrow many books as you want, as long as we get them back. Following the AGM on Friday, we have the usual format Friday meeting with Bruce Hellier, travelling from Sydney, especially to meet us. He will present an introduction to the thinking and work of Carl Jung. Bruce delivers his presentation to large U3A groups in Sydney. As a revision for most of us, we could all look forward to Bruce's presentation. This will be followed up the next day, Saturday, the 7th of March, with Bruce's experiential workshop entitled, Are You Living Your Life? Or the one that others expect of you. Bruce is a great presenter, and these two sessions, Friday evening and Saturday, should be a lot of fun. Check the website for up-to-date details of these, all other events. So thank you very much for coming along and making this a successful evening. And thank you it's very lovely for you to come and very special. Thank you very much. We've had a very nice time with you. And we have a good group. We have tonight, after talking to a few people, I have more things lined up for us for the next months or so. So Robbie's coming on and we have a few people coming on. So we're doing our homework and we look forward to seeing everybody again, and don't be strangers. Come along. And thank you for participating tonight. It's been very good to have you here.